You are probably doing a lot to adjust to the COVID-19 crisis right now. I want to help by providing some tips on how to adjust your data strategies. My name is Michelle Molina. I'm from Connecting Evidence, and I help nonprofit leaders and social innovators build their data and evaluation capacity. First, you should focus on what is really important, and that probably means that right now you are focusing in on how you can become a better partner and offer the services your community needs right now. Second to that would be figuring out your data collection strategies. And in terms of your data collection strategies, I recommend being open to adaptations, being flexible, understanding that you are going to do the best you can given the current situations, and most importantly, that you're going to do your best to keep everybody safe as possible. And you will also focus in on what is important in terms of data collection. This means that you should consider what sort of data collection activities are going to help you use your data and collect data that is useful. That's data that is going to help you make decisions, help you make improvements, help you understand if you are achieving key outcomes, and data that is going to enable you to advocate for your work in the future. For example, in the next coming months, how are you going to use data to actually advocate for your work? I recommend checking out a video I recently made on how to identify meaningful data. I also recommend checking out the theory of change videos I've done recently to help you understand or help you identify which outcomes are particularly important to your work. Remember, outcomes are the changes you hope to see because of the things you do in your community. I also recommend to do a stakeholder analysis to consider what is particularly important to your stakeholders and do the stakeholder analysis with the lens of what is particularly important to them now or what will be particularly important to them in the near future. The next thing I recommend is to consider how your context may be shifting. And to do this, I always recommend looking at the 6 levers or 6 conditions of systems change. These were identified in the FSG article titled The Waters of Systems Change. I recently did a video on this as well. The 6 conditions or levers are policies, practices, resource flows, relationships/connections, power dynamics, and mental models. So consider which of these levers or conditions are working in your favor, what is a barrier, and how your organization may be adjusting to them. You should be thoughtful about the sorts of adaptations you're making. This means that when you're thinking about how you're going to shift your activities, you should consider what's been working all along versus what maybe has not been working as well. And you can use your previous data to help you make these decisions. In terms of the future, you should consider what sort of needs are emerging for your community or the people you serve and how you might work to address those needs. This might require adding a few more data collection activities to your plans. In terms of adjusting your data collection plans, you should, 1, identify who is going to be the decision makers in terms of what adjustments are going to move forward, and also who is going to help you understand what sort of adjustments are appropriate. For example, people on the front lines are probably going to be very aware of your participants' capabilities compared to people who might be a decision maker sort of realm. So make sure you have both perspectives when you're considering what to move forward with. This is also an opportunity to build trust. You should share with your stakeholders how you plan to make adjustments, the reasons why you're making those adjustments, and what it means for them. And as you're making adjustments, don't forget to consider your participants and your data collectors' capabilities and their access to various resources. Some people will easily be able to hop on a Zoom conference and you might be able to do a focus group. Others are less tech savvy, and you need to keep that in mind when you're considering what the most appropriate adaptations or adjustments are to your data collection. There are also a lot of resources out there if you need some extra training regarding new data collection methods. For example, the Poverty Action Lab has a resource on how to do phone interviews, and RTI has resources on how to use text messages, and I'll leave links to those in the description below. I also recommend you explore your options for secondary sources. So by secondary sources, I mean data that's not collected by you, but is collected by somebody else. And I encourage you to reach out to other organizations. There are probably others in your community who are already collecting data or plan to start collecting data. This will benefit you in two ways. One, you are not taxing your potential participants by asking them the same questions, and two, you save your resources and time, and you're able to collect other data that maybe is not already being collected. For example, people might be interested in exploring how your community needs are changing given the current crisis. That means that there are probably people planning to collect that sort of data. So make sure to reach out to your partners, to others in your community, to people who have historically collected data, to make sure that you're not doing the same things they are already planning to do, but that you're using your resources as wisely as possible. I'd also encourage you to share the information you have. So if you have already been collecting data, make time to make sense of that data with your stakeholders, or share that data with people who care about the work you're doing. People are definitely hungry for some hope, so make sure if you have some evidence showing that your organization offers services that are especially helpful to people in your local community and the people you serve, make sure you're sharing your successes with others. And if you can, be the secondary source for people. So if you're one of those organizations that is going to be collecting data, make sure to let your partners in local communities, organizations know that you are going to collect data and that you all can work together to share resources in terms of data collection. Let me know in the comments below how you're going to share your data with others, whether you're going to organize sense-making sessions, or you are going to share your successes, or be a secondary source. One concern that I've heard from people who run programs is, what if this COVID-19 crisis affects the data that we're collecting? And I'm here to tell you that every single data that has ever been collected has its own set of limitations. That doesn't mean that you should stop data collection or avoid data collection. Just like you would in any other situation, you should consider how those limitations affect your data and what sort of interpretations should you make given your limitations. What I do encourage is that you be proactive. So when you are collecting data, perhaps you can include some questions about how people are dealing with COVID-19 so that you can factor that into your analysis. And when you're making sense of data, make sure to include questions or reflection ideas around how COVID-19 may have influenced the data or your findings. I also recommend that you and your organization document how you all are adjusting to COVID-19. One of the things that this whole situation has made me really think about is the role of developmental evaluation. So there are different types of evaluations, and I'm thinking of making a video describing different forms of evaluation, so subscribe if you're interested in that. But in developmental evaluation, the evaluator serves more as a thought partner. They are there to help you gather information about emerging topics so that you can use that information to make decisions along the way. Therefore, I encourage you to incorporate some of that into your work. So start collecting stories about how your organization is adjusting, how your participants or the people you serve are adjusting, how staff is adjusting. All this will help you paint a picture of how your organization dealt with COVID-19 and hopefully help serve your community better during this time. Collecting this sort of information will also help you keep an eye out for potential opportunities to adapt and adjust. You can ask questions like, what is happening? How are people adjusting? What should be our next steps? I found an article written by FSG that has a lot of different questions you can use to reflect on, and I'm going to leave that in the description below. It doesn't have to be something very complex. It could be something more informal, like a daily log perhaps, or a monthly or weekly reflection session where you and people get together to talk about how you're adjusting, what you're planning to do to adapt, and what do you think your organization should do moving forward given the crisis. The purpose here is to collect success stories, to collect lessons learned, and to collect information that will help you identify emerging ideas and new directions your organization can take to ultimately further your mission. In order for something to be considered data, it has to be systematic, meaning that you have to collect it in a consistent manner, and that is, don't just collect data from people you think will give you a gold star, collect it from everybody. It also means that you ask people similar questions. Being systematic also means that you look at things from a variety of angles. So you don't just ask one group of people, you ask people with a variety of perspectives. Or you use different methods. It also means that you are collecting your data in a way that will lead to less biases. So again, you're not just asking people that will give you a gold star, but you're asking people who might have some constructive criticism as well. So document how you are adjusting in a systematic way. You should also clarify your decision-making process. Now, you should probably already have a decision-making process in place that's clear, that all your organization knows of. But given that we are in a time of crisis, that means that you are probably making more decisions, that those decisions are very time sensitive, and that your processes may be different now. So make sure to clarify the decision-making process, ensure that everybody inside your organization knows of that decision-making process, and that when relevant, you also share it with other stakeholders just to ensure transparency and so that they know what's going on. So make sure people know who's going to be making decisions, what steps are going to be taken to make those decisions, and how are you going to ensure that those decisions are followed through with and sort of disseminated throughout the organization. I also recommend that you ensure that your staff and participants are trained if you are going to use any new technology. If we are very technologically savvy, it's often hard for us to remember how alien some technologies are for other people. So make sure that you are proactively asking whether or not people know how to use different technology and whether or not it's appropriate for certain groups. And when possible, make sure to offer some trainings and even train people on how to train others because they're probably going to be doing some of that in some circumstance. Remember, I'm sharing a few resources below that provide some training, for example, how to use phone interviews as a data collection method, also how to use text messages as a data collection method. Please, if you find anything that you think might be useful to others, leave it in the comments below so that this can be a place where we can share resources. My next tip is to plan for the future. That means you need to make time for reflection. We may never go back to business as usual or life as we knew it. If anything, we are now fully aware that a crisis like this is not out of the realm of possibilities. You should ask yourself what this crisis has taught you about your team's capacities, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and how might you plan and adjust so that you're better prepared for the next crisis. You should also ask yourself what this crisis has taught you about your community's needs. Unfortunately, there are a lot of inequities out there, and maybe the silver lining is that this crisis has highlighted those inequities, making them easier to see, making them easier to document, making it easier for us to collect data that will help us advocate for our organizations to address those challenges. So consider how this crisis has influenced your work, how it's going to influence your work in the future, and what you can do to address some of the inequities that are blatantly obvious at this point. If you're interested in hearing more often from me, make sure to join my mailing list. For example, I have a guide on how to collect meaningful data. Maybe that might be useful to you. If it is, sign up, get the guide, and you'll be added to my mailing list where I send regular resources. For example, on a weekly-ish basis, I try to send out a few grant opportunities I encounter. If you thought this video was useful, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with other people. If you have any tips you think would be useful to other nonprofit leaders, if you have any resources, anything you think might be helpful given the current crisis, make sure to leave it in the comments below so it could be a pool of resources for us to share. And if you have some free time, make sure to check out some of my other videos. For example, I have a video on what evaluation is. I have another one on how to develop a logic model. I also have one on what a theory of change is and what a stakeholder analysis is. So make sure to check those out.